The night before my mother's retirement dinner, our housekeeper told me not to walk through the front door. She didn't text, she didn't knock. She called my cell at 6:47 p.m. while I was still in the parking garage of my office building, keys already in my hand. Her voice was low, the kind of low that isn't about volume. It's about making sure no one else hears. "Don't go in through the front," she said. "Park down the street. Come through the back gate. And whatever you do, stay in the kitchen. There's something you need to hear before you walk into that house tonight." I almost laughed. I said, "Alois, I've been walking through that front door my whole life." She said, "I know, just trust me, please." Alois has worked for my parents for 22 years. She was there when my brother was born. She taught me how to fold fitted sheets and how to make my grandmother's cornbread. She is not a dramatic woman. In 22 years, I have never once heard her ask me for anything. So I parked down the street, I came through the back gate, I stood in the kitchen, in my good blazer and my heels I'd worn to work, and I waited. My name is Tatum. I'm 31, I'm the older daughter, the one who stayed local while my sister moved across the country, and built a life that looked, from the outside, like total freedom. The one who handled my parents' accountant when my father's medical bills piled up. The one who quietly moved the money around when my mother's catering business nearly collapsed during the pandemic. The one who drove every Sunday for 3 years. When my father couldn't, after the surgery, that's who I am in this family. The one who handles things. My mother's retirement dinner was my idea. 40 years in food service. She deserved a real celebration, not just a dinner at someone's house. I found the venue. I paid the deposit. I coordinated the guest list. My sister flew in for it, and immediately had opinions about the floral arrangements. I had just assumed that's how it worked. I do the work. Everyone enjoys the result. That's been the pattern my whole life. Eloise handed me a glass of water. She looked at the door to the hallway. Then she looked back at me. "They're in the dining room," she said. "Your sister, and your mother's, and your brother-in-law." I started to move toward the hallway. She put her hand on my arm. "No, listen first." I stopped. I stood very still in that kitchen, where I had done homework at the counter and eaten cereal on Sunday mornings, and cried once after a breakup when I was 24. I stood there and I listened. My sister's voice first. She sounded the way she always does when she's excited about something she hasn't told me yet. There's a particular pitch to it, higher than normal, a little breathless. She won't even question she is. "You know, she'll think it's just paperwork." My mother's voice. Quieter. "Are you sure Tatum hasn't already looked at it?" "Mom, when does she ever look at anything her name isn't on?" I set the water glass down on the counter very carefully so it wouldn't make a sound. "Her name isn't on. Something my name wasn't on. The property transfer goes through by the end of the month," my brother-in-law said. His voice I recognized immediately. He's a real estate attorney. He's been a real estate attorney for 12 years, which is relevant, which became very relevant, which I will get to. Once it's done, Tatum's share reverts automatically. She signed the authorization in the estate planning documents. 2 months ago. My mother had called and asked me to come over to sign something. She said it was for the estate planning her attorney had put together. She said it was routine. My brother-in-law had been there, which hadn't seemed strange at the time because he's an attorney, and these are family matters. He'd slid a folder across the table. He'd explained it the way he always explains things, calmly, technically, with the confidence of someone who knows you won't understand the specifics and is counting on it. I'd skimmed it. I'd signed, because that's what you do when someone you love asks you to trust them with paperwork. And the business accounts? My sister again. She doesn't have direct access anymore. When Mom made me co-owner last spring, that transferred the operational authority. Tatum's name is still on the original incorporation documents, but those don't carry weight without the operational signature. Last spring, My mother had made my sister co-owner last spring. I had not been told this. "She's going to be so busy with work," my sister said. "She won't even notice until it's been done for months." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I just don't want a scene tonight." My sister's voice went soft, the way it does when she's being reassuring. "There won't be one. Tonight is your night. After the dinner, we'll handle the rest." I stood in that kitchen for a long time after the voices moved away. Eloise had her hand on the counter beside me, not touching me, just close. When I finally looked at her, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I said, "How long have you known?" She said, "Long enough that I couldn't stay quiet anymore." I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. Instead, something went very still inside me, the way water goes still right before it freezes. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I picked up the glass of water. I walked through the hallway and into the dining room, and I hugged my mother and told her she looked beautiful, which she did. The dinner was lovely. The venue was exactly what I'd envisioned. The flowers were the ones my sister had changed at the last minute, which were fine, actually. I'm not petty. There were 40 people there who loved my mother. There were speeches. There was a slideshow I had spent 2 weeks putting together. Photographs from every decade of her career. Her face so young in the early ones, it made my chest hurt. My brother-in-law sat at the end of the table and drank wine and laughed at his own jokes and shook hands with my father's old colleagues. My sister gave a toast about how my mother had taught her that women can build things from nothing. I raised my glass. I smiled. I thought, "I know exactly what you built. And I know exactly what you thought you were taking." The part no one in that room understood was that I had also read those estate planning documents. Not the pages I'd been shown. All of them. 3 weeks after I signed, something nagged at me. A specific phrase in the summary sheet. I'd asked my own attorney to pull the full filing. He'd called me 2 days later and said, very carefully, "Tatum, I need you to come in." I went in. I read everything. I had 2 weeks to sit with it before my mother's dinners. And I had used those 2 weeks well. The property in question was a commercial building my parents had bought in 2009. My name had been added to the title when my father was sick, and they needed a secondary signatory. I hadn't thought about it in years. What I hadn't known, until my attorney explained it, was that my name on that title carried specific inheritance rights under the state's property code. Rights that predated the estate documents. Rights that could not be quietly transferred away through a third-party authorization signed over dinner. My brother-in-law had made an error. A significant one. He had assumed I wouldn't read what I'd signed. He had assumed that, because I trusted my family, I wouldn't verify. He was a real estate attorney who had let familiarity make him careless. I drove home after the dinner. I took off my heels at the door. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cold cup of coffee, and I pulled up every document I had. There were more than they knew about. I'm organized in a way that my family has always found slightly excessive. I have folders going back 8 years. Receipts for every expense I'd covered. A spreadsheet tracking every loan, every transfer, every time I'd quietly stopped something that would have otherwise collapsed. The pandemic year alone was a number I hadn't let myself look at in a while. I sat there until 2 in the morning. Then I started drafting emails. Not angry ones. Informational ones. A resource being publicly acknowledged. The first was to the County Property Records Office, requesting a formal review of the transfer authorization and its compliance with existing title law. The second was to my own attorney, instructing him to file a notice of dispute on the title, a resource being publicly acknowledged. The third was to the business's primary vendor, the one my mother's catering company had worked with for 15 years, noting that I had questions about the recent ownership structure and asking for confirmation of the current signatory authority on the commercial account. The vendor email was the one that mattered most, a resource bind. Because what my sister and brother-in-law hadn't known was that 3 years ago, when the business nearly went under, I had restructured the vendor contract myself. I was the one who'd negotiated the terms. I was the one that added a clause requiring dual authorization for any account changes above a certain threshold. My name and my mother's, both required. They had transferred operational authority to my sister. They had not transferred the vendor contract clause because they hadn't known it existed. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to let the architecture speak for itself. Monday morning, I went to work. I answered emails. I had a noon meeting I didn't cancel. At 10:14, the vendor's accounts manager called my cell. We've just received some conflicting information about the authorization structure on your mother's account, she said. We wanted to clarify before processing the quarterly renewal. I said, thank you for calling. I'd recommend holding the renewal until the title dispute is resolved. I'll have my attorney send over the formal notice today. At 11:02, my brother-in-law texted me. What did you say to Harvest Supply? I didn't respond. At 11:47, my sister called. I let it go to voicemail. At 12:30, while I was still in my meeting, my mother called 3 times. At 1:15, the Property Records Office confirmed receipt of my dispute filing. At 1:49, my brother-in-law showed up at my office building. I know because the front desk called up to tell me. I asked them to let him know I was in a meeting and would be available by appointment. He texted again. We need to talk. This is not what you think. I thought I know exactly what this is. I called my attorney at 3. He had already been contacted by my brother-in-law's firm. He said the tone had been notably less confident than expected. I said, good. Let's let the process work. By Wednesday, the quarterly vendor renewal was formally on hold. By Thursday, the title transfer had been flagged by the county for additional review. By Friday, my mother called me from the landline, which she only does when she is very serious or very upset, and asked if she could come over. She came over. She sat on my couch. She looked smaller than she had at the dinner, which had only been 5 days ago, but felt like a different season entirely. She said, I didn't think you'd find out. I said, I know, she said, your sister needs the security. You've always been so capable. I sat with that for a moment. So capable. A reason to take something from someone. So capable that it doesn't count, I said. Mom, when my father was sick, who rearranged her whole work schedule to drive him to appointments? She didn't answer. When the business almost closed, who transferred money out of her own savings account? Still quiet. When the lease on the commercial kitchen came up for renewal and you didn't have the cash, who negotiated a deferral and co-signed? She said. Tatum. I'm not asking for credit, I said. I'm asking you to understand what you decided I was worth. After all of that. She cried. I didn't. The freezing had gone all the way through by then. There was nothing left to thaw. My sister called that evening. No soft voice this time. She was angry, the specific kind of angry that sounds like offense, but is actually fear. You're blowing this up over property that you don't even use, she said. I said. I'm filing a legal dispute over property that was being transferred without my informed consent. You signed the documents. I signed documents that were presented to me selectively. That's going to be very interesting for a court to look at, given that your husband is the attorney who prepared them. Silence. This is going to ruin his reputation, she said finally. I said. That's a consequence I didn't create. My brother-in-law tried once more. He came on a Sunday evening. No aggression. Just the careful, measured tone of someone who has spent a career talking people out of things. He said, we can resolve this privately. There's no reason for it to go further, I said. I agree. Here's what private resolution looks like. I slid a folder across my kitchen table, just like he had 2 months ago at my parents' house. Inside was a straightforward proposal. A formal buyout of my share of the property at fair market value. A revised estate document, prepared by my attorney, reflecting actual contribution history, and a letter of withdrawal from his involvement in any further family financial arrangements. which I was asking him to sign not out of spite, but because the conflict of interest was, at this point, undeniable. He read it slowly. He said, "This is aggressive." I said, "This is accurate." He said, "The property isn't worth what you're valuing it at." I said, "My attorney disagrees. So does the county assessor's office. You're welcome to dispute it formally." He didn't dispute it formally. He didn't dispute it formally. By the following Thursday, the funds were in my account. The title dispute was withdrawn. The vendor contract was updated with my sister's name, replacing mine properly with both parties' signatures, the way it should have been handled from the beginning. I called Eloise the same day. I drove to my parents' house, when I knew no one else would be there, and I sat with her in that kitchen, and I told her what had happened. All of it. She listened the way she always has, with her hands around a mug and her eyes steady. I had brought an envelope. 6 months of what she was currently making. Because that's what felt right, and because I could. I told her she didn't have to do anything different. I told her she had done more than she knew by making one phone call on a Sunday evening. She pushed the envelope back toward me. I pushed it back toward her. I pushed it back toward her. She said, "I just couldn't watch it happen." I said, "I know, that's exactly why." She kept the envelope. My sister and I have not spoken since the Sunday my brother-in-law came over. She texted once, about 2 weeks later. The text said, "I hope you know you've changed things in this family permanently." I read it in a parking lot, and I sat with it for a minute. Then I put my phone in my bag, and I went into the grocery store, and I bought things for dinner, and I drove home. She wasn't wrong. Things had changed permanently. She just had the cause and effect reversed. My mother calls on Sundays now. We talk. It's careful. The way things are when something has been cracked and repaired, and you're both aware of the seam. I don't know what her relationship with my sister looks like from the inside. I don't ask. I have stopped managing things that aren't mine to manage. What I know is this. I spent a decade being the reliable one, the capable one, the one who could handle it, and I let that become a reason for other people to make decisions about my life, without including me. I let the work I did quietly become invisible because I believed that's what good daughters do. I believed that love meant absorbing whatever was handed to you without complaint. I understand now that's not love. That's just a very efficient system for the people it benefits. The night Eloise called me from the driveway, I almost didn't go through the back gate. I almost said, "I'm sure it's fine." I also almost trusted the family story I'd been telling myself for 31 years. I'm glad I didn't. I rebuilt their accounts during the hard years. I renegotiated their contracts. I co-signed loans they've never mentioned since. I did all of that, and I did it while they planned, very quietly, to write me out of the ending. The difference is, I read the fine print this time. All of it. And when it mattered, so did the law.